The King of Elfland's Daughter by Lord Dunsay. Part 4. Chapter 8. The Arrival of the Rune. On a sunny May morning in Earl, the witch, Zero-on-Durrell, sat in the castle nursery by the fire, cooking a meal for the baby. The boy was now 3 years old, and still Lirazel had not named him, for she feared lest some jealous spirit of earth or air should hear the name. And if so, she would not say what she feared then. And Alveric had said he must be named. And the boy could bowl a hoop, for the witch had gone one misty night to her hill and had brought him a moon halo, which he got by enchantment at moonrise, and had hammered it into a hoop, and had made him a little rod of a thunderbolt iron with which to beat it along. And now the boy was waiting for his breakfast, and there was a spell across the threshold to keep the nursery snug, which Zero-on-Durrell had put there with a wave of her ebon stick, and it kept out rats and mice and dogs, nor could bats sail across it. And the watchful nursery cat it kept at home, no lock that blacksmiths made was any stronger. Suddenly, over the threshold and over the spell, the troll jumped, somersaulting through the air, and came down sitting. The crude wooden nursery clock hanging over the fire stopped its loud tick as he came, for he bore with it a little charm against time, with strange grass round one of his fingers, that he might not be withered away in the fields we know. For well the Elf King knew the flight of our hours. 4 years had swept over these fields of ours, while he had boomed down his brazen steps and sent for his troll and given him that spell to bind round one of his fingers. "What's this?" said Zero-on-Durrell. That troll knew well when to be impudent, but looking in the witch's eyes saw something to be afraid of, and well he might, for those eyes had looked in the Elf King's own. Therefore he played, as we say in these fields, his best card, and answered, "A message from the King of Elfland." "Is that so?" said the old witch. "Yes, yes," she added more lowly to herself, "that would be for my lady. Yes, that would come." The troll sat still on the floor, fingering the roll of parchment inside of which was written the rune of the King of Elfland. Then, over the end of his bed, as he waited for breakfast, the baby saw the troll and asked him who he was and where he had come from and what he was able to do. When the baby asked him what he was able to do, the troll jumped up and skipped about the room like a moth on a lamplit ceiling, from floor to shelves and back up, and he went with leaps like flying. The baby clapped his hands. The cat was furious. The witch raised her ebon stick and made a charm against leaping, but it could not hold the troll. He leapt and bounced and bounded, while the cat hissed all the curses that the feline language knows. And Zero-on-Durrell was wrath, not only because her magic was thwarted, but because with mere human alarm she feared for her cups and saucers. And the baby shouted all the while for more. And all at once the troll remembered his errand and the dread parchment he bore. "Where is the Princess Lirazel?" he said to the witch. And the witch pointed the way to the princess's tower, for she knew that there was no means nor power she had by which to hinder a rune from the King of Elfland. And as the troll turned to go, Lirazel entered the room. He bowed low before the great lady of Elfland, and with all his impudence in a moment lost, kneeled on one knee before the blaze of her beauty, and presented the Elf King's rune. The The boy was shouting to his mother to demand more leaps from the troll. As she took the scroll in her hand, the cat, with her back to a box, was watching alertly. Zero-Underel was all silent. And then the troll thought of the weed-green tarns of Elfland in the woods that trolls knew. He thought of the wonder of the unwithering flowers that time has never touched, the deep, deep colour and the perpetual calm. His errand was over and he was weary of earth. For a moment, nothing moved there but the baby, shouting for new troll antics and waving his arms. Lirazel stood with the elfin scroll in her hand. The troll knelt before her. The witch never stirred. The cat stood watching fiercely. Even the clock was still. Then the princess moved and the troll rose to his feet. The witch sighed and the cat gave up her watchfulness as the troll scampered away. And though the baby shouted for the troll to return, it never heeded, but twisted down the long spiral stairs and slipped out through a door, was off towards Elfland. As the troll passed over the threshold, the wooden clock ticked again. Lirazel looked at the scroll and looked at her boy, and did not unroll the parchment, but turned and carried it away, and came to her chamber and locked the scroll in a casket and left it there unread. For her fears told her well the most potent rune of her father, that she had dreaded so much as she fled from his silver tower and heard his feet go booming up the brass, has crossed the frontier of twilight written upon the scroll, and would meet her eyes the moment she unrolled it and waft her thence. When the rune was safe in the casket, she went to Alveric to tell him of the peril that had come near her. But Alveric was troubled because she would not name the baby and asked her at once about this. And so she suggested a name at last to him, and it was one that no one in these fields could pronounce, an elvish name full of wonder and made of syllables like birds' cries at night. Alveric would have none of it, and her whim in this came, as all the whims she had, from no customary thing of these fields of ours, but sheer over the border from Elfland, sheer over the border with all wild fancies that rarely visit our fields. And Alveric was vexed with these whims, for there had been none like them of old in the castle of Earl. None could interpret them to him, and none advise him. He looked for her to be guided by old customs. She looked only for some wild fancy to come from the southeast. He reasoned with her with the human reason that folks set much store by here, but she did not want reason. And so, when they parted, she had not, after all, told anything of the peril that had sought her from Elfland, which she had come to Elveric to tell. She went instead to her tower and looked at the casket, shining there in the low, late light, and turned from it and then often looked again, while the light went under the fields and the gloaming came and all glimmered away. She sat there by the casement, open towards eastern hills, above whose darkening curves she watched the stars. She watched so long that she saw them change their places. For more than all things else that she had seen since she came to these fields of ours, she had wondered at the stars. She loved their gentle beauty, and yet she was sad as she looked wistfully to them. For Alveric had said that she must not worship them. How, if she must not worship them, could she give them their due? Could she thank them for their beauty? Could she praise their joyful calm? And then she thought of her baby. Then she saw Orion. Then she defied all jealous spirits of the air, and looking towards Orion, whom she must never worship, she offered her baby's days to that belted hunter, naming her baby after those splendid stars. And when Alveric came to the tower, she told him of her wish, and he was willing the boy should be named Orion, for all in that valley set much store by hunting, and the hope came back to Elfric, which he would not put away, that being reasonable at last in this, she would now be reasonable in all other things, and be guided by custom and do what others did, and forsake wild whims and fancies that came over the border from Elfland. And he asked her to worship the holy things of the Freer, for never had she given any of these things their due, and knew not which was the holier, his candlestick or his bell, and never would learn for aught that Elfric told her. And now she answered him pleasantly, and her husband thought all was well, but her thoughts were far with Orion. Nor did they ever tarry with grave things long, nor could tarry longer amongst them than butterflies do in the shade. All that night the casket was locked on the rune of the king of Elfland. And the next morning Lirazel gave little thought to the rune, for they went with the boy to the holy place of the Freer, and Zirondarel came with them, but waited without, and the folk of Earl came too, as many as could leave the affairs of man with the fields, and all were there of those that had made the parliament. When they went to Elfric's sire in the long red room, and all of these were glad when they saw the boy and marked his strength and growth, and muttered low together as they stood in the holy place. They foretold how all should be as they had planned, and the Freer came forth, and standing amongst his holy things, he gave to the boy before him the name of Orion, though he sooner had given some name of those that he knew to be blessed. And he rejoiced to see the boy and to name him there. For by the family that dwelt in the castle of Earl, all these folk marked the generations and watched the ages pass, as sometimes we watch the seasons go over some old known tree. And he bowed himself before Elfric and was fully courteous to Lirazel, yet his courtesy to the princess came not from his heart, for in his heart he held her in no more reverence than he held a mermaid that had forsaken the sea. And the boy came even so by the name of Orion, and all the folk rejoiced as he came out with his parents and rejoined Zirondarel at the edge of the holy garden. And Elfric, Lirazel, Zirondarel and Orion all walked back to the castle. And all that day Lirazel did nothing that caused anybody to wonder, but let herself be governed by custom and the ways of the fields we know. Only when the stars came out and Orion shone, she knew that their splendour had not received its due, and her gratitude to Orion yearned to be said. She was grateful for his bright beauty and that cheered our fields, and grateful for his protection, of which she felt sure for her boy against jealous spirits of air. And all her unsaid thanks so burned in her heart that all of a sudden she rose and left her tower and went out into the open starlight and lifted her face to the stars in the place of Orion, and stood all dumb, though her thanks were trembling upon her lips, for Elfric had told her one must not pray to the stars. With face upturned to all that wondering host, she stood long, silent, obedient to Elfric. Then she lowered her eyes, and there was a small pool glimmering in the night, in which all the faces of the stars were shining. To pray to the stars, she said to herself in the night, is surely wrong. These images in the water are not the stars. I will pray to their images, and the stars will know. And on her knees, amongst the iris leaves, she prayed at the edge of the pool, and gave thanks to the images of the stars for the joy she had had of the night, when the constellations shone in their myriad majesty and moved like an army dressed in silver mail, marching from unknown victories to conquer in distant wars. She blessed and thanked and praised those bright reflections shimmering down into the pool, and bade them tell her thanks and her praise to Orion, to whom she might not pray. It was thus that Elfric found her kneeling, bent down in the dark, and reproached her bitterly. She was worshipping the stars, he said, which were there for no such purpose, and she said that she was only supplicating their images. We may understand his feelings easily, the strangeness of her unexpected acts, her contrariness to all established things, her scorn for custom, her wayward ignorance, jarred on some treasured tradition every day. The more romantic she had been far away over the frontier, as told by legend and song, the more difficult it was for her to fill any place once held by the ladies of the castle, who were all versed in all the lore of the fields we know. And Alveric looked for her to fulfil duties and follow customs, which were all as new to her as the twinkling stars. But Lirazel felt only that the stars had not their due, and that custom or reason or whatever men set store by should demand that thanks be given to them for their beauty. And she had not thanked them even, but had supplicated only to their images in a pool. That night she thought of Elfland, where all things were matched with her beauty, where nothing changed and there were no strange customs and no strange magnificences, like these stars of ours to whom none gave their due. She thought of the elfin lawns and the towering banks of the flowers and the palace that may not be told of but only in song. Still locked in the dark of the casket, the rune bided its time. Chapter 9. Lirazel blows away. And the days went by, and summer passed over Earl. The sun that had travelled northward fared south again. It was near to the time when the swallows left those eaves, and Lirazel had not learnt anything. She had not prayed to the stars again or supplicated their images, but she had learned no human customs, and could not see why her love and gratitude must remain unexpressed to the stars. And Alveric did not know that the time must come when some simple trivial thing would divide them utterly. And then, one day, hoping still, he took her with him to the house of the Friar to teach her how to worship his holy things. And gladly the good man bought his candle and bell, and the eagle of brass that held up his book when he read, and a little symbolic bowl that had scented water, and the silver snuffers that put his candle out. And he told her clearly and simply, as he had told her before, the origin, meaning and mystery of all these things, and why the bowl was of brass and the snuffer of silver, and what the symbols were that were carved on the bowl. With fitting courtesy he told her these things, even with kindness, and yet there was something in his voice as he told, a little distant from her, and she knew that he spoke as one that walked safe on shore, calling far to a mermaid amidst dangerous seas. As they came back to the castle, the swallows were grouped to go, sitting in lines along the battlements, and Lirazel had promised to worship the holy things of the Friar, like the simple bell-fearing folk of the Valley of Earl. And a late hope was shining in Alveric's mind that even yet all was well, and for many days she remembered all that the Friar had told her. And one day, walking late from the nursery, she passed tall windows to her tower, and looking out on the evening, remembering that she must not worship the stars, she called to mind the holy things of the Friar, and tried to remember all she was told of them. It seemed so hard to worship them just as she should. She knew that before many hours the swallows would all be gone, and often when they left, her mood would change, and she feared that she might forget and never remember more how she ought to worship the holy things of the Friar. So she went out into the night again, over the grasses to where a thin brook ran, and drew out some great flat pebbles that she knew where to find, turning her face away from the images of the stars. By the day, the stones shone beautifully in the water, all ruddy and mauve. Now they were all dark. She drew them out and laid them in the meadow. She loved these smooth, flat stones, for somehow they made her remember the rocks of Elfland. She laid them all in a row, this for the candlestick, this for the bell, this for the holy bowl. "If I can worship these lovely stones as things ought to be worshipped," she said, "I can worship the things of the Friar." Then she kneeled down before the big flat stones and prayed to them as though they were Christian things. And Alveric, seeking her in the wide night, wondered what wild fancy had carried her whither, heard her voice in the meadow crooning such prayers as are offered to holy things. When he saw the 4 flat stones to which she prayed, bowed down before them in the grass, he said that no worse than this were the darkest ways of the heathen, and she said, "I am learning to worship the holy things of the Freer." "It is the art of the heathen," he said. Now, of all things that men feared in the Valley of Earl, they feared most the arts of the heathen, of whom they knew nothing, but that their ways were dark. And he spoke with the anger which men always used when they spoke there of the heathen. And his anger went to her heart, for she was but learning to worship his holy things to please him, and yet had spoken like this. And Alveric would not speak the words that should have been said to turn aside anger and soothe her, for no man, he foolishly thought, should compromise in matters touching on heathennesses. So Lirazel went alone, all sadly back to her tower, and Alveric stayed to cast the 4 flat stones afar. And the swallows left, and unhappy days went by. And one day Alveric bade her worship the holy things of the Freer, and she had quite forgotten how. And he had spoken again of the arts of the heathenesses. The day was shining and the poplars golden and all the aspens red. Then Lirazel went to her tower and opened the casket that shone in the morning with the clear autumnal light, and took in her hand the rune of the king of Elfland, and carried it with her across the high vaulted hall, and came to another tower, and climbed its steps to the nursery. And there all day she stayed and played with her child, with the scroll still tight in her hand, and merrily though she played at whiles, yet there were strange calms in her eyes, which Zeronderel watched while she wondered. And when the sun was low, and she had put the child to bed, she sat beside him all solemn, as she told him childish tales, and Zeronderel, the wise witch, watched, and for all her wisdom only guessed how it would be, and knew not how to make it otherwise. And before sunset, Lirazel kissed the boy and unrolled the Elf King's scroll. It was but a petulance that had made her take it from the coffer in which it lay, and the petulance might have passed, and she might not have unrolled the scroll, only that it was there in her hand. Partly petulance, partly wonder, partly whims too idle to name, drew her eyes to the Elf King's words in their coal-black, curious characters. And whatever magic there was in the rune of which I cannot tell, and dreadful magic there was, the rune was written with love that was stronger than magic, till those mystical characters glowed with the love that the Elf King had for his daughter, and there were blended in that mighty rune 2 powers, magic and love. The greatest power there is beyond the boundary of twilight, with the greatest power there is in the fields, we know. And if Alveric's love could have held her, he should have trusted alone to that love, for the Elf King's rune was mightier than the holy things of the Freer. No sooner had Lirazel read the rune on the scroll than fancies from Elfland began to pour over the border. Some came that would make a clerk in the city today leave his desk at once to dance on the seashore, and some would have driven all the men in a bank to leave the doors and the coffers open and wander away till they came to green open lands and the heathery hills, and some would have made a poet of a man, all of a sudden as he sat at his business. They were mighty fancies that the Elf King summoned by the force of his magical rune, and Lirazel sat there with the rune in her hand, helpless amongst the mass of tumultuous fancies from Elfland. And as the fancies raged and sang and called more and more over the border, all crowding on one poor mind, her body grew lighter and lighter, her feet half rested, half floated upon the floor. Earth scarcely held her down. So fast was she becoming a thing of dreams. No love of hers for earth or of the children of earth for her had any power to hold her there. And now came memories of her ageless childhood besides the tarns of Elfland, by the deep forest's borders, by those delirious lawns, or the palace that may not be told of except only in song. She saw those things as clearly as we see small shells in water, looking through clear ice down to the floor of some sleeping lake. A little dimmed in that other region across the barrier of ice, so too her memory shone a little dimly from across the frontier of Elfland. Little queer sounds of elfin creatures came to her. Scents swam from these miraculous flowers that glowed by the lawns she knew. Faint sounds of enchanted songs blew over the border and reached her seated there. Voices and melodies and memories came floating through the twilight. All Elfland was calling. Then, measured and resonant and strangely near, she heard her father's voice. She rose at once, and now earth had lost on her the grip that it only has on material things, and a thing of dreams and fancy and fable and fantasy, she drifted from the room, and Zero-Onderel had no power to hold with her any spell, nor had she herself the power even to turn, even to look at her boy as she drifted away. And at that moment a wind came out of the northwest and entered the woods and bared the golden branches and danced on over the downs and led a company of scarlet and gold leaves that had dreaded this day but danced now it had come, and away with a riot of dancing and glory of colour, high in the light of the sun that had set from the sight of the fields, went wind and leaves together. With them went Lyrazel. End of part 4. If you have been enjoying this audiobook, please take the time to subscribe. It would really help the station. If you could also like or leave a comment or share this station with other friends, that would be great. Thank you.